The line of sailors stood motionless beneath the burning sun, eyes fixed forward, boots planted in formation on the gray tarmac of the naval base. The roll call began, names and ranks echoing through the air in sharp cadence. And then it happened, swift, deliberate, unmistakable. Her name was skipped, her rank unspoken. Dozens of shoulders tightened, a ripple of unease passing silently through the ranks. Yet no one moved. No one dared break discipline. Only the young lieutenant at the center of the line felt the full weight of the omission. Her name earned through sleepless nights, combat tours, and scars invisible to most had been erased in a single breath. And then, before the silence could collapse into humiliation, the admiral himself strode forward. His voice cut like steel, low but thunderous with conviction. "You don't move without her word." The formation froze. Time itself seemed to halt. Every sailor felt it, the invisible shift in gravity, the rearrangement of power in that single sentence. She stood there, rigid in her uniform, the sun tracing fire across her skin. The insult burning deeper than the heat. The air was heavy with unsaid truths. The months she had carried others through storms at sea. The nights she had written casualty letters with trembling hands. The years of discipline that had shaped her spine into iron. Her name had not been forgotten, it had been omitted. The sharp-faced officer leading the roll call had let his disdain spill into the open, as though her sacrifices could be erased with a pause. But she did not flinch. Her silence was her weapon. Her eyes, steady as a horizon, bore into the distance. She gave them nothing. No weakness, no anger, only the quiet presence of someone who had faced fire before and refused to yield. She had not always been stone. There had been a time when her laughter had filled barracks, when her hands had carried letters scented with the perfume of home. There had been a brother in arms who used to lean against the rails beside her, telling stories of the small town they would both return to one day. That dream had ended with a folded flag delivered to his family doorstep. She had stood beside the casket, her uniform pressed, her jaw locked tight against the tide of grief. War had demanded more from her than it had given back. Yet still, she rose each dawn. Still, she wore the uniform with pride. Still, she believed that service meant sacrifice, even when her sacrifice went unseen. Her back bore the faint ache of shrapnel that had once torn through her shoulder. Her sleep was haunted by nights on a blackened sea, where the smell of burning fuel clung to the wind and the cries of wounded men echoed through the waves. Yet every morning she stood straight, every inspection met with precision, every command executed without fail. She had given all, asked little. And now on this morning of all mornings her name had been silenced. The officer who had skipped her rank stood smug, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking with barely disguised disdain. To him, she was a complication, an unwelcome presence who had risen too high for his liking. The unspoken prejudice of years had gathered in this single act of disrespect. And the crowd of uniforms? Silent, bound by rules, by fear, by the rigid code of military order. Their eyes flickered but no lips parted. That silence was louder than any insult. This was the weight she carried, not only the wound of being overlooked, but the burden of knowing that those who saw the injustice would not speak. The world around her seemed built on unspoken complicity, and yet she did not move, she did not break. The quiet dignity in her stance spoke louder than any protest. The admiral had watched from the edge of the tarmac. His eyes had followed her, as they always had, not with favoritism, but with respect. He had seen her years before, soaked in salt water, pulling men from burning wreckage, while smoke scalded her lungs. He had watched her drag a comrade twice her weight across steel decks slick with blood. He knew her worth. So, When the officer's voice slid past her name, the admiral felt the insult as if it were directed at the Navy itself. He stepped forward, each stride commanding, his metals glinting in the sun, his authority filling the air like thunderclouds. The formation held its breath. And then came the words that rewrote the silence. "You don't move without her word." The ranks stiffened, eyes widened. Every sailor understood the shift. Her presence was no longer a subject of dismissal. It was command. The officer who had omitted her faltered, his throat catching as the admiral's gaze fell upon him. His authority crumbled in the weight of that single sentence. The line between arrogance and disgrace snapped like a rope in a storm. The sailors who had remained silent felt shame press into their chests. Slowly, almost reverently, heads turned toward her. And she? She did not move. She allowed the silence to stretch, to remind them all that dignity does not demand noise. Her stillness was more commanding than any outburst. The admiral spoke again, his voice deliberate. "Every command issued today runs through her. You stand when she stands. You move when she moves." The tarmac, once heavy with disregard, now brimmed with something else: respect, fear, awe. It was then that she finally moved, a single, measured step forward. Not a word left her lips, yet the shift in her posture carried the weight of unspoken command. The formation mirrored her step, boots striking in perfect unison. The officer who had sought to erase her shrank beneath the weight of it all. His smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow realization that silence, when armored with honor, could undo even the loudest prejudice. And among the sailors, whispers would later circulate, retelling the moment again and again. Some would repeat the admiral's words as though they were scripture. "You don't move without her word." Others would remember the stillness of her stance, the quiet that had crushed arrogance without raising a voice. But all would agree something had shifted that day. The power of the moment did not lie in revenge, nor in spectacle. It lay in a truth far deeper. Respect cannot be stripped by omission, nor silenced by envy. True authority is born not from rank pinned to a collar, but from sacrifice etched into the soul. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight she carried lighten, not because the world had suddenly become just, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud in front of all who had denied it. The formation ended in silence, broken only by the admiral's final words, softer this time but no less commanding. "Honor is not given, it is lived, and she has lived it more than most." Every sailor lowered their gaze, not out of shame, but out of reverence. And as they dispersed, some found themselves walking slower, their eyes drawn toward her, as though hoping to catch even a fragment of her strength. That night, as the base quieted, the memory of the day clung to them. Some replayed the injustice, ashamed they had not spoken sooner. Others repeated the admiral's line, until it became a vow etched into their minds. But for her, the night was still. She sat alone by the sea, the salt air wrapping around her like a familiar cloak. Her silence was not empty, it was full. Full of the voices of those she had carried through storms, the faces of those who had never made it home, the honor of knowing that though her name could be skipped by men, it could never be erased from the history of sacrifice. Two quotes would linger, carved into the hearts of those who witnessed that day. "Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is the sharpest blade." And the one that had shifted the tide forever. "You don't move without her word." In the end, the insult had become a moment of revelation. The officer who had sought to diminish her found his reputation in tatters. His authority stripped not by punishment, but by the invisible judgment of his peers. And she, without protest, without demand, had risen above them all. Respect, once denied, had been restored in the most unshakable way, through the dignity of silence and the weight of sacrifice. And for those who now remember her story, It remains a testament, an eternal reminder, that the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with honor,